The July-August 2026 issue of Asimov's Science Fiction magazine was a great overall issue with some standout stories, and a few of those stories featuring a theme blending historical events and science fiction. I'm going to start off this Asimov's Science Fiction magazine review with a summary of the table of contents. So that includes what you can expect to see in this magazine, like the number of stories, the overall theme, a quick recap of the nonfiction articles, and then after that we will get into the reviews of the short stories themselves. So starting off, this magazine has 10 overall fiction stories in it, and that includes 2 novellas, 2 novelettes, and 6 short stories. And then in addition to the short fiction, we have 5 sci-fi poems. Asimov's always has a few poems kind of spread throughout the magazine in between the stories. And there are also 5 nonfiction or editorial articles. And the editorial articles feature the usuals from Robert Silverberg and James Patrick Kelly. You can see them pop up in every single issue. And where Robert Silverberg will give his, he kind of shares his reflections on his career and some of the history of science fiction and where science fiction is at today and that sort of thing. Kind of his opinion on the overall look of sci-fi. And his articles are always called Reflections, and this article is called Reflections, One Thing Happens. And then we'll have an editorial kind of nonfiction article by James Patrick Kelly, and his articles are always titled On the Net, and he kind of shares his opinions on the internet and sci-fi culture, often linking to many different websites you can find talking about science fiction. And in this issue's article, he shares his On the Net worldwide editors, where he talks about science fiction editors worldwide. And I always enjoy the articles by these 2 authors, and this issue was no different. So if you're kind of interested in like the history of science fiction and the current state of science fiction, I would recommend reading both of those articles in every issue really, but in this one as well. And then we have another editorial article by Emily Hockaday, who is the senior editor. And in this article, she talks about the 2026 Must-Read Book Awards. And then near the end of the magazine issue, there is always a On Books article. This one's by Paul D. Filippo. In this section of the magazine, Paul shares his reviews on new release and recently released science fiction. I usually kind of skim over this section, but if you're interested to hear somebody's opinions on some newer science fiction novels, it's definitely worth checking out. And it's worth checking out, skim through and see what books you might be interested in and, the reception for that book. And then the last editorial article we have with every issue is, of course, the next issue. And this kind of gives a sneak peek of the next issue, which in this case will be the September-October issue. And so looking ahead to that one is going to be kind of a slightly spooky issue where they'll have some science fiction stories with a theme of kind of some horror intermingled within those. And throughout my time reading Asimov's science fiction, I have subscribed off and on for a few years. But they'll usually kind of have each issue will have a theme, and some of the stories will kind of fit around this theme. Not every story. It'll just be 3 to 5 stories will kind of fit around this theme. And so this issue in particular, we have a theme around historical events, and this includes some alternate history, time travel, and some stories set in the past which have science fictional elements in them. So this issue's theme is history, and if you're a fan of history mixing with science fiction, I think you're going to really enjoy this issue. I do like historical fiction myself, so I really enjoyed this issue when we get to combine history and sci-fi. Alright, now we are moving on to the short story reviews. So for each story, I'm going to kind of give a brief synopsis and my overall review for it out of 5 stars. I'm not going to go kind of an in-depth or detailed review because, with short stories, I don't want to spoil anything. Just kind of want to give you an idea of what to expect from this story, what's in it, and how good the story is itself. And I will start off by saying that I am a little more lenient in my ratings when it comes to short stories. I don't give 5 stars very often for novels, but when it comes to short stories, I'm a little more lenient in that. And so I will give 5 stars more often, just because there's only so much you can do with a short story, as you are limited. The author is limited in word count, and I think it's a little harder in a novel to do everything perfectly for 400 to 1,000 pages, depending on the size. But for a short story, it's a little easier for the author to accomplish what they set out to do, at least from a reader's perspective. Maybe from an author's perspective, short stories are harder, but at least from a reader's perspective, in a reviewer's perspective, I look to see, did I enjoy the story? Did it kind of set out to did it accomplish what it set out to do? Was it engaging? Did I like the characters? That sort of thing. Did it have good concepts? And then I'll rate it based on that. So let's get into the first story, which is a novella by Sam W. Pisciata titled A Flame in the Dark. This novella was 4 out of 5 stars for me. And this is a story set in 1775, so it's one of those that follows the historical theme. Following a husband and wife duo of amateur scientists who have settled in the New World near Boston. They build a dissonance device to study chaos. It is constructed of a series of tubes, flutes, and wires in order to create a specific tone of sound. When pointed at organic matter, such as plants or fruit, the material decays in seconds. This also has the side effect, of causing a dissonance zone in the forest near their settlement, causing strange and unexplained events to occur, like the screaming of plants, never before seen flowers, and odd behavior from animals. Nettie, the wife, sets out in the forest to catalog the flora and fauna, and she takes notes of the strange occurrences. After a terrifying event involving her husband, the story becomes an interesting series of events involving the consequences of Nettie and her husband's strange experiments. So this was a very interesting story set in the 18th century. I really did enjoy it. The writing was sometimes a little bit stilted at times, but overall, a good story, action-oriented, with some very interesting concepts and events throughout the story. The next story in this issue is a short story by Zach Bay called Gumchew, which I have given 4 out of 5 stars. This is an interesting story about biomodding and brain gumming. The main character is a freelancer trying to get a video of a mam, or a modified human that looks like an animal. This mam, named Fin Fang, is a popular figure and minor celebrity who can usually be found inside of his dance club. Meanwhile, our main character takes his dad to a clinic to get a gum injection that will make him feel younger and improve his cognition. This is a story combining elements of biological modification and medical enhancements that make people feel younger and improve their cognition. And it does so with an engaging character focus and intriguing plot. Our next story of the issue is a novelette by Alan Small and a 5 out of 5 story for me called Roma Delenda Est. And this is an alternate history story set in the time of Hannibal of Carthage. The story imagines that Archimedes was not killed by the Romans during the siege of Syracuse, and instead was saved and captured by Carthaginian soldiers. He gets taken to Hannibal to tutor Hannibal's son Hasper and to give advice for Hannibal on his war with the Romans. So this was a very well-written story with some humor and wit in the writing. And I did have to look up the history of Archimedes and Hannibal before I actually realized it was an alternate history story. And it reads very much like historical fiction. So in real history, Archimedes is in Syracuse, and it's getting besieged by the Romans, and he ends up getting killed by the Romans during that siege. And so the alternate history here is that Archimedes doesn't get killed by the Romans. Instead, he's captured by the Carthaginians. So it ends up definitely turning the events of history between Carthage and Rome. And if you're interested during this time period, I would definitely recommend this story. Very engaging plot, really well-written characters. And I mean, even if you're not interested or know anything about Hannibal or Rome, I mean, I had to look up some of the details of what was going on here. But even if you're not interested, I think this was a really good story and a good piece of historical fiction combined with alternate history, making its way into a science fiction magazine. The next story is a short story by Sandra MacDonald called The Last Train to Gertrude, Stein. And I gave this one a 3 out of 5. It is about a woman who is potentially 1,000 years old, and she is experiencing these memories of all of her past lives. And kind of throughout this story, she gets confused about what's happening. She remembers her time with historical figures like Picasso and Hemingway, but then she gets confused when people ask her about Gertrude Stein's parties. So if you're familiar with Gertrude Stein, which I wasn't, I had to also look this one up afterwards. She was this French author who had these parties with other celebrities like Hemingway and Picasso. And this was kind of during a time right before World War II. And there's been some suggestions that she was a kind of a Nazi sympathizer, but also she kind of did what she had to survive the occupation. So I think there's some controversy around her figure, deserved or not. But anyway, so this woman, this main character, she's also starts off the story. She bakes tarts and sells them to people. And she's living in Paris. And in the future, and Paris is going through this, it's getting bombed. There's some kind of war going on. There's a bombing campaign. She has to run to a shelter. And then she meets up with a man who has also lived many past lives like she has, and may have even been one of her past lovers. And every time this person dies, she's resurrected as someone else. So she's lived many lives. She's been involved with a lot of historical figures and celebrities. So this was another short story with a historical theme. But didn't overly stand out to me. It was okay, but not all that engaging of a story overall. And our next story is another short story. This one by Carol Lagodsky, called Brother Adalbert's Last Shift. And this one was a 3 out of 5 for me. So Brother Adalbert is on his last shift of caring for this ancient tree. And there he goes, and afterwards he meets up with human resources and is assigned to an accounting position. And during this time, he falls in love with the receptionist. So there's not really much to this story. I don't really have a whole lot to say about it, but it was okay, and it was a 3-star story for me. Moving on to the next short story, this one by Gregory Marlowe, and it is called Seeking, and this is another 3 out of 5 story for me. It is about a drug addict who is chasing a high and trying to acquire more drugs while an ongoing first contact situation is happening on Earth. Our character follows the news as giant ships are stationed over the major cities. I kind of got similar vibes to Independence Day, the movie. And the author says he wrote the story as a tribute to Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke. And during the story, this drug addict character does take a rare first edition hardcover of Childhood's End that was left to him by his father, who recently passed away. And of course, you can probably guess to where that leads to, what he's going to do with it. And this whole time during the story, he is hoping that aliens will save humanity from themselves. So I thought it was an okay story. I don't. Stories about drug addicts aren't really compelling to me, so I didn't care for that part of it. And I did kind of feel like a lot of it was copied from Independence Day, but it was well written and ended up with 3 stars. Our second novelette of the issue is a story by Robert Reed called Oliana's Skull. This was a 4 out of 5 story for me. And this one is set in Robert Reed's Great Ship series that starts with the novel Marrow. I enjoyed the story overall, but I felt like I was missing some context from the rest of that series. There are quite a few stories in his Great Ship series now, and this was the first story of the Great Ship that I had read. And the story begins with the character of Meneas Bad, as he witnesses another boy getting bullied by a couple of others. Meneas is a star athlete with great potential. He decides to intercede by telling the bullies to stop. They flinch, and the bully boy takes the opportunity to escape, but ends up falling off a cliff in his glee and dying. The story then follows Meneas, Landy Sweet, one of the bullies, and an immortal captain in hiding, Pamir, changing the perspectives between these characters throughout the story. Meneas, Landy, and Pamir encounter each other in various seemingly unrelated ways, but their stories all intertwine. There was a lot of great world building of the Great Ship in this story, and where there's a river that separates the immortal humans and aliens on one side of a cliff, with kind of the more normal mortal humans on the other side of the cliff, and they can kind of stare at each other across the cliffs. They live in I think it's some kind of simulated world on this giant ship, and like the sun and the sky is simulated and all that. And there's some other world building to this story that that's kind of where I think I was missing the context from his overall Great Ship series. But I didn't quite understand the world that they were living in, other than it's, a massive ship. Maybe some parts of it are in a simulation. But, it was a great overall story, and it makes me want to get into the Great Ship story some more. So I think I will end up doing that in the future, starting with the novel Marrow. After Oliana's Skull, we have another short story called The Translations of the Sirens by Matthew de Abatua. And this story was only a 2 out of 5 stars for me. It is a story about the mythical creatures of sirens and a historical recounting set during World War I of a man trying to translate and understand what the sirens are saying. Now, the story didn't really feel like science fiction to me, except where this man is kind of using this scientific method to understand what these sirens are saying. It was another historical focused story based upon that theme, but it wasn't really a very compelling or entertaining story to me. The next story we have is another short story called The Hydrological Cycle of Souls by Minister Faust. And this story was actually a DNF by me, so I'm not going to give it a review out of 5 stars since I didn't finish the story. I didn't really have a compelling hook to start the story with, or really any interesting concept to draw me in. So I can't really give much of an overview of this story, other than I didn't really like it. So usually, Asimov does have a variety of stories each issue. Usually at least one will be a DNF for me. And that's just kind of the way it goes with short story collections or magazines of a variety of stories. Not everything is always going to work for everyone, and this story didn't work for me. It may work perfectly well for somebody else. Just wasn't kind of the thing that I was interested in. And the last story of this issue was a novella by Alan M. Steele called Better the Devil You Know, and this one was another 5 out of 5 stars. And this is a time travel story of chrononauts who go back in time to observe events and learn more about history. In this story, a student obsessed with the Morro Castle ship disaster steals a newly built time ship. A team is put together to follow him into the past and stop whatever this person by the name of Volp might be planning. The team includes Volp's former professor and an experienced chrononaut who is involved with the Hindenburg disaster. And the Morro Castle was a cruise ship that caught fire in 1934, so that is a real event that happened, and it led to the death of 137 passengers and crew. It has been suspected, but never proven, that the result of this disaster was deliberate arson by the chief radio operator, George White Rogers. So this was a very fast-paced and engaging plot, and it told a compelling story about a little-known historical event, and it was definitely a page-turner of a story. So I wasn't aware of the Morro Castle tragedy until I read this story and had to look it up. So, there are 2 or 3 stories here where I had to look up the historical events it was based on. But yeah, this one, there was a cruise ship in 1934 that caught fire and led to a tragedy, and there's a little bit of controversy around it. So in this story, Alan Steele takes us back into the past and to witness this event, and then kind of try to stop the consequences of changing time, because you never know how that will affect the future. And before I wrap up here, a little update on the printing and shipping issue for Asimov's physical magazines. So as of the time of this video is out, I still have not received the physical copy of the March-April issue. They were supposed to be shipping it out very soon. I haven't yet. So I'm sure any of the subscribers here will already be very well aware. If you haven't, if you only subscribe to the physical copies, you haven't received those yet. Still waiting on March, April, let alone May, June, and July, August issues. But the digital copies are available immediately upon release, so you can get the digital copies. And if you are a physical only subscriber, they have made the digital copies of these issues available on the Analog website, the Analog Science Fiction and Fact Magazine website. So you can go on there, create an account, and you can download PDFs and ebooks of each of these issues for free. And that's it. That's all I have for you today. Let me know in the comments, have you read any of these authors? Would you like to read any of these authors or stories? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching. See you next time.